The music stopped mid-note. Not faded. Not lowered. Cut. I was still holding my drink when I realized every single person in the room was staring at my wife, and the man whose hand was still wrapped around her waist. That was the moment I understood I wasn't misreading anything anymore. I was 41 years old, standing in a rented ballroom overlooking the river in Chicago, watching my wife smile at another man like I wasn't even there. The smile wasn't drunk. It wasn't polite. It was intimate. Familiar. The kind of smile you don't practice, you fall into it. And everyone saw it. The silence didn't come from shock alone. Came from recognition. From that instinct people have when they realize they're witnessing something private that just became public. Minutes earlier, the room had been loud. Glasses clinking. Laughter bouncing off high ceilings. Someone had given a toast about lasting love, and everyone had laughed at the irony, unaware of how cruel those words were about to become. Now no one laughed. The man slowly let go of her waist, but it was too late. The damage had already happened. You can't unsee a truth once it decides to introduce itself. That night didn't start as a disaster. It started as a celebration. It was our 10th wedding anniversary. Folded neatly into a joint birthday party my wife insisted on throwing, to make it special. She said she wanted people around. Energy. Music. She said it would remind us of who we used to be. I believed her. That's important to say. I wasn't suspicious walking into that room. I wasn't checking phones or scanning faces. I was proud. I wore the watch she gave me our first year married. I stood close to her during photos. I kissed her cheek when people weren't looking. I thought we were fine. I work in event logistics, ironically enough, so I'm trained to notice details. Lighting. Timing. Flow. I noticed that my wife, Lena, drifted away from me often that night. Not dramatically. Just naturally. Like water finding a lower point. She laughed louder when she wasn't next to me. She touched my arm absent-mindedly, like it was a habit she hadn't broken yet. We'd been together 12 years. Married 10. Long enough to know when someone's body has started telling a different story than their words. But I ignored it. Because sometimes love is choosing denial when the truth feels too heavy to hold in public. The man who pulled her onto the dance floor was named Aaron. I knew him. That made it worse. He was part of her volunteer committee for a local arts foundation. Something she joined 2 years ago when she said she needed something that was hers. He was charming in that casual way that makes people feel safe too quickly. Mid-40s. Divorced. Always saying the right thing at the right volume. I'd noticed before that he looked at her a second longer than necessary. I told myself I was being territorial. Insecure. Married men aren't supposed to notice those things, right? The band switched to something upbeat. Aaron clapped his hands once and said something to Lena I couldn't hear. She laughed and shook her head, the way she used to when we were younger. The way she hadn't done with me in months. He took her hand. I waited for her to look at me. To ask. To hesitate. She didn't. She stood. Let him pull her forward. The crowd cheered lightly. It didn't seem inappropriate at first. Just dancing. Just music. Just a moment. Then his hand slid to her lower back. Then she leaned in. Then their foreheads touched. I felt myself shrink in real time. Like someone had turned the volume down on my existence. People noticed. I saw it in the way heads tilted. In the way smiles stiffened. In the way my sister stopped mid-sip across the room. Eyes locked on the dance floor. I didn't move. That's the part people never understand. They ask later why you didn't storm over. Why you didn't stop it. Because when humiliation hits, it doesn't ignite you. Freezes you. The song ended. Applause started, confused, polite, thin. Aaron leaned in and whispered something into Lena's ear. She laughed. That's when the music cut. Not planned. Not dramatic. Someone, maybe the band leader, maybe the venue manager, realized the temperature had dropped too fast. Realized something had gone wrong. Silence rushed in. Lena finally looked at me. Our eyes met. And instead of guilt or shock or apology, what I saw was calculation. Not panic. Calculation. She stepped back. Smoothed her dress. Walked toward me like this was something we'd discuss later. Privately. Like I was overreacting to something everyone had just witnessed. Don't do this here, she said quietly. I hadn't said a word. That's when I knew. The drive home was quiet in the way only something broken can be. No radio. No accusations. Just the sound of the road and the truth settling into its final shape. At home, she kicked off her heels and sat on the edge of the bed. "I didn't plan for that to happen," she said. I leaned against the doorway, still wearing my jacket. "But you didn't stop it," I said. She exhaled. "Long tired. I didn't think you'd make it into a scene." That sentence cut deeper than the dance ever could. Not "I'm sorry." Not "I hurt you." Just "don't embarrass me." I asked the question I already knew the answer to. "How long?" She looked up at me then, really looked, and said, "Do you actually want the truth? Or do you want something that lets us sleep tonight?" That was the moment the marriage ended. Not with yelling. Not with tears. But with a choice I didn't get to make. Her voice stayed calm as she said the words that still echo in my head. "You were safe. Aaron makes me feel alive." I sat down slowly, like my legs had forgotten their purpose. "I never meant to hurt you," she added, almost kindly. That's when I finally spoke, louder than a whisper. "Then why did you do it in front of everyone?" She paused and said, "Because hiding was starting to feel dishonest." That night I slept on the couch. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Something had cracked open, and no amount of explanation was going to seal it again. I didn't sleep. I lay there listening to the refrigerator hum, the city breathing outside the windows, my mind replaying the dance in fragments. Her head tilted, his hand confident. The way the room had gone quiet, not for me, but because everyone else had understood before I did. By morning, Lena was already dressed. Hair neat. Makeup light. Like she was preparing for a meeting, not walking past the wreckage of a decade. "I'm going to stay at Claire's for a few days," she said, tying her shoes. "We both need space." "From what?" I asked. "The consequences?" She didn't answer. She picked up her bag and paused at the door. "You don't need to tell people," she said. "Let's not turn this into a story." That was the moment I realized she wasn't ashamed of what she'd done. She was ashamed of how it looked. The days after blurred. Friends texted cautiously, like approaching a wound they didn't want to reopen. My sister came by with groceries I didn't eat. At night, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how something could end so loudly and yet feel so quiet. On the fourth day, Lena came back to talk. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, legs crossed, hands folded, composed, prepared. "I care about you," she began. I stopped her. "Don't," I said. "Just don't." She blinked, surprised. "I need to be honest," she said instead. "I've been unhappy for a long time." "That's not honesty," I replied. "That's revision." She stiffened. "People grow apart." "People grow apart quietly," I said. "They don't humiliate their partner in public and call it growth." Her eyes hardened. "I didn't humiliate you," she said. "You're choosing to see it that way." There it was. Gaslighting doesn't shout. It rewrites. So I imagined the room going silent? I asked. I imagined my sister texting me, "Are you okay?" from the bathroom. She looked away. "Aaron understands me," she said. "He listens." "I listened," I said. "I just didn't clap when you danced with someone else." She flinched. Just slightly. Then she said the line I will never forget. "Your feelings don't matter to me the way they used to." It wasn't cruel. It was factual. Delivered like an update. Something inside me collapsed. Not dramatically but completely. Like a support beam quietly removed. I realized I had been negotiating for a version of her that no longer existed. And I was tired. "I'm not competing," I said. "I'm not convincing. And I'm not staying." She looked genuinely startled. "You're overreacting," she said. "We can work through this." I stood up. "No," I said. "You already worked through it. I'm just late to the meeting." That was the turning point. Not anger. Not revenge. Acceptance. The next weeks were brutal in smaller ways. Dividing books. Deciding who kept the couch. Hearing from mutual friends who tried to stay neutral but failed quietly. I learned things without asking. That Aaron had been coming around longer than she admitted. That people at the party had suspected something before I did. That some of them felt sorry for me, not because I was betrayed but because I didn't see it coming. That last one hurt the most. I started questioning everything. My judgment. My worth. My ability to read a room, something I'd built a career on. There were nights I almost called her. Almost asked for explanations I knew wouldn't help. Almost apologized for things that weren't mine to carry. But each time I remembered her words. Convenient. Safe. Feelings don't matter. And something steadier replaced the urge to beg. Pride, not the loud kind. The quiet refusal to disappear. I moved into a smaller place closer to the lake. I walked in the mornings. I sat with the discomfort instead of drowning it. I let myself grieve the man I thought I was, the husband, the anchor, the constant. Loss of identity is the sharpest pain. Not losing someone, but losing who you were when they loved you. One evening, weeks later, I ran into Aaron at a grocery store. Completely by accident. He froze when he saw me. I didn't mean for it to happen that way, he said quickly. She told me you knew. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't special. He was just the next chapter she chose without closing the previous one. I hope it was worth it, I said. And I meant it, not as a threat but as a genuine question. He didn't answer. Walking away from that encounter, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I won, but because I was done losing myself trying to understand other people's choices. I didn't rebuild my life in a montage. There was no sudden clarity, no dramatic haircut, no speech where I reclaimed my power in front of an audience. Healing came quietly, in moments so small I almost missed them. Like the morning I realized I hadn't checked my phone to see if she texted. Like the day I heard our song in a cafe and didn't leave. Like the night I fell asleep without replaying the dance floor in my head. Those were the real milestones. The divorce moved forward the way divorces do. Paperwork, schedules, polite emails stripped of emotion. Lena stayed civil. Careful. She never apologized, but she stopped defending herself too. That told me everything I needed to know. Aaron faded into the background of her life, at least from what I heard. Not because karma arrived with fireworks, but because relationships built in the shadow of someone else's pain don't stand well in daylight. That wasn't my victory. It was just gravity doing its job. My own life narrowed before it expanded. I took fewer gigs. I said no more often. I learned the difference between being needed and being valued. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected because I thought marriage meant exclusivity in every direction. One night, months later, my sister hosted a small dinner. No speeches. No dancing. Just food and laughter that didn't feel forced. Someone asked how I was doing, and I answered honestly. I'm better, I said. Not healed. Just better. That felt like the truth. The biggest shift wasn't in my circumstances. It was in my boundaries. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't confused. I stopped romanticizing emotional neglect. I stopped calling endurance love. I realized something else too. Public humiliation hurts less over time than private self-betrayal. Staying silent when your dignity is on the line costs more than leaving ever will. Lena and I spoke once more in person a year later to finalize a remaining detail. We met in a neutral cafe. She looked older. So did I. I never meant to hurt you, she said again. I nodded. I know, I replied. But intention doesn't change impact. She didn't argue. We parted politely. Two people who once knew each other deeply now connected only by history. Walking out, I felt light. Not because I'd won, but because I'd released something I'd been carrying too long. Here's what I learned, and this is for anyone listening who recognizes themselves in parts of my story. Love that requires you to shrink is not love. If someone can betray you publicly and ask you to manage their comfort afterward, they've already left the relationship. You're just the last to be informed. And dignity doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from the moment you stop negotiating your worth. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I just don't make room anymore for people who treat my presence as optional. If you're standing in a room that's gone silent because someone showed you exactly who they are, believe them. And then walk out with your head up. That's not revenge. That's freedom.